Well, One South Africa leader Mmusi Maimane says he's ready to meet the Basic Education Department in court again regarding the reopening of schools. Maimane says schools should remain closed during the coronavirus peak. He joins us now via Skype to discuss further. Thank you very much for joining us. So what alternative are you offering as opposed to what it is that we are seeing?
Good afternoon, and to all our fellow South Africans. Our call has remained that what South Africa ought to be doing is guided by the World Health Organization, shut the schools for a period till the post-peak period, adjust the curriculum, which is to ensure that post-September learners can acquire the basic competencies to be able to proceed to the next level. Thirdly, that we offer a digital platform for matriculants, particularly those so that their learning can be blended. So a limited contact period coupled with an online learning experience, that in fact we could push the academic year till the start of next year, that ultimately then that's when assessments ought to take place, and that we use the period that we are talking about now to address plans of infrastructure at schools, but also communal engagement. So this is about ensuring that actually delivery of food and all of those programs are actually brought closer to home for learners, and that we also acquire additional facilities so that more and more learners can be spread out upon return. It's the way to at least do our best to safeguard as many lives as possible, or we run the risk of making school centers upon which the virus can spread.
Is the call for schools to reopen post the peak in September, or for the schooling year to be closed entirely and for us to pick up in 2021?
No, I'm asking that it be open post the peak, because you cannot, the World Health Organization speaks about when you want to open schools, you have to ensure that there's a control of the virus, that you limit community spread. South Africa is in the eye of the storm. It doesn't have both those things in control. And infection rates are rising. And in fact, you can reflect this on the basis of how long it takes for one to get tested. You could conceivably have a teacher test today and only be able to get their results 7 days from now. It means in that period, in that 7-day period, that teacher could continue infecting learners, infecting colleagues, infecting support staff. So our view is that let us wait until the post period. It will also not only give the health facility an ability to catch up to their testing mechanisms, but also to ensure that the adequate programs are put together so that we can develop a proper response to this particular virus, because clearly our government has long forgotten about looking after the citizens.
What has been your level of engagement with relevant stakeholders, chief amongst which teacher unions?
There has been, but as you can now clearly see, that the initial engagement was before the 1st of June. When you compare infection rates from the 1st of June to the 1st of July, and you compare what is happening today, it's clear that South Africa is accelerating. It isn't decelerating in terms of infection. So you can't say you consulted in one context and now that consultation must hold forever. This is a time where you need agility in government. That's why in One South Africa movement, you build an agile state by ensuring that you can respond to the conditions as they present themselves to you now. Therefore, it becomes vital that as SARTU have eventually come on board to say, look, we've reviewed what the argument is. Now we are convinced that schools must also be closed. I would be convinced that there will also be other institutions that will come on board.
Much has been said about the fourth industrial revolution, especially on the continent, and our preparedness for that. You speak of digital platforms and online learning in a country like South Africa. Just how feasible is that, given the lack of access to data, given the lack of access to basic education tools, computers, iPads, etc.?
Where there's a will, there's a way. Where the president has, in fact, we all agree that we should have by now allocated spectrum. When you do spectrum allocation, it is in that context that you can reduce the cost of data. That's but one argument. Furthermore, it's part of our economic infrastructure that we ought to have been building anyways. Regardless of COVID, this should have been core to the business of what we do. Secondly, I really believe as part of economic rebasing and modeling, what we've got to do is ensure that the availability of digital equipment should be made available to matriculants. This should have been something that we should have been doing. We have not been able to do it because other people have got interests, such as the provision of textbooks and all of those types of things. But we can migrate all that learning onto an online platform. South Africa is innovative and resilient enough to be able to achieve that. And then lastly, we can then be able to, no one is arguing that all education should only take place online, but we are very clear that blended learning is the future. It is a sustainable model, and in rural communities we can be able to zero-base data costs that speak to educational curriculum and ensure that our learners are migrated onto an online platform. This is something that a country like South Africa ought to have been doing way before COVID, and even more so now during COVID. It is the only sustainable future we have as a nation.
A World Economic Forum report on the future of jobs and skills notes 65% of children entering primary school today will ultimately end up working in completely new job types that don't yet exist. Given the opportunity that you drive education in South Africa, what would you do differently?
It is that whole point. Our old pedagogic model has now become extinct. If we're still insisting of preparing children from an industrial era where they can in fact sit for an assessment where they repeat learnings that they've got, that's an old model. What I am proposing is that actually as we migrate people into a digital climate, that we reform what the practical steps that learners ought to be going through right throughout their academic year, that in fact we become more focused about processing knowledge, blended knowledge, and ensuring that there's actual practical execution for learners. We've got to, all of us as a society, rethink what we're trying to do. We've got to rethink our education output, and we've got to say to ourselves, more than anything, we are not preparing kids for a world that has passed. We're preparing kids for the future. So why can't we make coding as an essential language in our country, that it becomes something that all learners are compelled to learn in their classroom? That's one of the innovative spaces that we can already be putting infrastructure in and ensuring that even we retrain our educators so that becomes part of the core competence they put forward. But I really do think COVID has given us a crisis moment with which we can reform education in its entirety.
One South African movement leader, Mmusi Maimane, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.